So good afternoon, and thank you everyone for coming. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to have Professor Uma Chakravarti here with us this afternoon. Uma is very well known to those of us who've worked in the area of women's studies, gender studies, history. We've been familiar with her writings for a very long time. And this morning, Uma spoke to some of our students about women's education and the history of women's education in the 19th century. In fact, many of her writings have enabled us to see the 19th century very differently and to recast it in a very different light from what our textbooks, our school textbooks seem to teach us. My own personal favorite amongst many of Uma's writings that I enjoy, one of my personal favorites was her chapter in the book Recasting Women. Her chapter is called Whatever Happened to the Vedic Dasi, and it really made me think very differently about the history of women in ancient India. Uma has also written extensively on Buddhism, on women educators. Her book on Pandita Ramabai is very widely read and has been translated into several languages. She's also written about contemporary India, and she's written about the movement for women's rights, various other democratic movements. She's written on 1984, the riots in Delhi, and she's been a very active participant in the movement for democratic rights and for women's rights within that. And today she's going to present from her personal collection of posters of the various movements in which she has participated, which then enable us to see a certain picture of the history of the democratic movements in independent India that emerges from her personal collection of posters. So we're very happy to have her here today. Thank you for coming.
Hello, is it, can you hear me now? Is it, ठीक है? On है क्या? On है? हाँ, इधर ऊपर रख देंगे, बस. Okay, now I suppose today I've earned my keep because I came and did a 3-hour session, so I've done my speaking based on my reading and writing, and so I don't have to feel like I'm short shrifting you, but I'm getting increasingly, what's it called, I feel that, you know, there's a formal style of writing that we do, but there are other things in our lives that we also do, which also need to be documented. And I suppose, as a historian, I feel archiving is actually a very important aspect of our work, because if we don't archive now, then the future generations do not have the kind of sources that you should be looking at. And I feel that the idea of our documents and our sources has to expand to include things which normally in the public domain will not end up in an archive. You know that, I don't know how many of you have used the archive, but suppose you were to go to Delhi and you were to go to say the National Archives, or you were to go to the Secretariat Library, or you to go to one of these public institutions, you will find the kind of material that ends up over there is actually stuff which is regarded as the staple of the official history that is practiced. You know, there's a notion of what is history. There's a notion that the official document constitutes the basis of history, and in a sense that is so exclusive, it just leaves out the historical experiences of not only women, but large sections of men are not represented in that history also. You know, I mean, so the laboring man, the whole sections of the margins will never actually appear in the official public institutional space in which memory is being kept. So in one sense, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that the way we have learned to look at either politics or look at particularly history, is too much from the lens of the public space, and really it leaves out the experiences of many of us out of it. So how do we feature in history? How do we actually, we or our past features in history? And you can see that problem even today. You open the newspaper and the newspaper will give you always the big headline will always be about something which is extremely regarded as the important index for that day. So it will usually be some nonsensical stuff between, as you know, I mean, the political class is actually fighting with each other about this or that or the other, some real rubbish. But that will form the headline. And the real stuff of history will either disappear or it will come on page 10. And you know that even you, many of you, will not read page 1. You'll go straight to page 3 or page 5 where the gossip stuff is, where the trivia of life is, except that the trivia is concentrated on the public figures who are not otherwise appearing on the front page. But we have now got implicated in looking at characters in and around us from a certain lens, and this is always also constructed by to an extent by the public media of your time. Now if you think of all this, then how do you actually tell a history which is an alternative history? How do you tell the history of an oppositional imagination? And really, democratic movements, the women's movements, is actually telling you the story of an oppositional imagination. They are not implicated in the way in which we are regarding the contemporary moment. It is a counter story that they want to tell. And that counter story, where is it? So are we going to confine it only to fact-finding reports or some campaigns that you may run for a short period of time? And then whatever paper that you've produced for that campaign will actually disappear because you have no space to put that. And all of us know, I don't know how many of you have been in movements, but you'll find whether it's this movement or that movement, you will find that there's a lot of paper that would have been generated, pamphlets and so on, which you might actually circulate. People stand at street corners and distribute pamphlets asking people to asking people to read what you believe is a story that is not being told. And this paper will disappear because who's got the place to keep all of this around? And the poster became something of this kind. That is, now you can't do a public campaign without a poster. And most posters were actually created in a haste at night, newspapers with red paint on it or whatever it is. That's how you actually made your posters and stuck them in places. But sometimes you got more arty and you created images and whatever, and you have to go to, say, you go to JNU, you'll find that there's a poster which is as huge, as larger than the screen, maybe one whole wall. And it'll be telling you there's a real poster war going on in JNU. And so every formation, whether it's left, right, whatever, Dalit groups, everybody has a huge hoarding. And it's very, very powerful and you capture it. But I'm not sure that anyone is even documenting it in a camera so that you'll actually be able to see what is the way in which you are entering a debate at a given moment. And there will be no history left of that. So in that sense, the poster is something that we have produced for a purpose. And when you produce it for that purpose, you take it around and then you stick it on whatever it is, or you carry it as a hoarding. And after a while, it's a piece of paper, it'll start fragmenting, it'll disappear in a while. And none of us has the time or the energy to actually preserve that material. Now, for some reason, I suppose I became obsessed with archiving without saying I'm obsessed with archiving. So I was always doing cuttings. I was always doing cuttings of some kind, and my house is filled with paper cuttings, which have gone from one house to another, so as the posters. So much litter, so much actual paper that people we're always wanting to throw out each other's paper, like every member of the household, I want to throw out my husband's, he wants to throw out somebody else's. Essentially, we're all throwing out each other's paper. And certain amount of anger was generated at the fact that I have cupboards filled with these papers. So, so there was something about what are you going to do with all this stuff? It's not even classified. It's not even filed. What's the point? Even I can't find some of it when I want it. And I'll say, I don't care. It's going to stay with me. It'll go from one house to another. When I die, you just put it on my body and burn it, I mean, but it's going to stay with me till I do that. So, yeah, okay. So essentially, it's a way in which I can't lose the sense of the politics of my time. It's that what I want to hang on to. It's that what I'm somehow keeping alive. And so for me, I've not been able to do trendy things like calendar art. Many of my colleagues have been associated with nice glossy books that they've produced out of calendar art and, sort of ladies bathing under the water running or whatever it is, and that's calendar art. And you can actually make a nice entry into popular culture through all of that. I've wondered why people have never paid any attention to the poster. Because the poster is as much a visual document of your time. And it is as much contested. I don't know how many of you have made these posters, but you argue over every line. Usme kya dal rahe ho tum? Because unless you actually can capture something in a summary form, in order to speak to a larger audience, you are failing as a poster maker. You have to, and then it has to be visually attractive also so that it catches your eye. So actually it's a highly creative act. And we're allowing it all to disappear. So I really want to focus today on and so I have kept some of these posters. Most of these posters in this collection will be from mine. It has become like the history of my times as viewed by me. It is not, obviously it's not going to speak to you in precisely the same way, but I would like to take you through that journey so that you can also see what are the issues that have informed and agitated us over the years, which tells you an alternative history which, whether you write up as a formal account or not, does exist. And it's also fun. I'm very tired of only speaking. I like the idea that there should be something viewing. I'm also turned into a filmmaker because of that, because it gives me a little respite from the fact that I have to go on speaking otherwise, or writing, even worse. Okay, okay, so the first one. All right, I've never had this fantastic, Azim, Premji, thank you, 3 screen. 3 different ones, everyone can see it. So this is actually a poster, which is a non-poster. But I have it because it is the moment when I became invested and I became political in the space that actually I was occupying as a teacher, like in a university space like this. I was a teacher in Miranda House, and it was Delhi University was a hotbed of politics, student and teacher politics, and it was also a period in which it was the moment of repression, the first moment of repression in Indian politics of a certain kind. Up until this time, I think we all pretended that there's nothing wrong with our state, everything's functioning. Of course, we still do it. We say world's largest democracy, but the fact of the matter is, this was the time when it was tested for the first time. And the emergency was imposed really in order to do something as stupid as keeping the seat. And you could have gone to court and let it defer or whatever. But it was extremely repressive. I was teaching in Miranda House, and 200 teachers from Delhi University were picked up and put in jail. 200, not less than that. Most of them supposedly right-wing. Some of them left. And 6 of them were kept in jail for a whole 9 months. The entire 19-month period. So it was really massive for us. And Khatija was speaking to me today. She said the IB actually showed up at her place in a class. And we were all being told, "Bolna nahi class mein." There are cops sitting there as students. So there was this fear all around you. Okay, we don't know who around you is going to tell the story about the fact that, what are you saying in class? So it was an attempt at monitoring.
of course, we lost the battle because now very soon we are going to have closed circuit monitors which will show to the world what we are saying in the class at any given moment. So but at that time it was like something huge. So here's this a terrible paranoid situation, and there is a bunch of students who are this very visible small sense of resistance at that moment. They make this poster. It's a poster which is a non-poster because the copies of it disappeared. Okay, it's now available only in Anand Patwardhan's Prisoners of Conscience. It's one of the images in Prisoners of Conscience. And it was not a poster in the poster sense. Vijay Pratap, who was a student at that stage and who was in Delhi University in the Department of Sociology, he described to me what they did. They took a photograph of Mrs. Gandhi and they painted these bars across her. That's how posters are made, okay? They painted these bars across her and then they wrote, Tana Shaun ki Akhri Jagah. Of course they were picked up. They were caught, picked up. A couple of them, one of them was very badly tortured. He has never recovered from that torture. Vijay Pratap has gone on to make another life for himself, but it was such a terrible moment that nobody was actually willing to stand up at that moment. The emergency, the imposition of the emergency was being resisted by sections of the media. So the Indian Express, for instance, which had been quite active before that, did not do an editorial and left the space blank because you were supposed to vet your what was printed by the press censors. Press censorship had been imposed, and you had to show what you were writing to these characters unless it was innocuous. So Indian Express simply left it as a blank page, and that was their mode of resistance. It was a very bad time. I mean, and it was so bad that it has actually pushed many of us into confronting the nature of state power at that moment. It's the one time because I tried to rear the temple of freedom for you all, I was thrown into the cell of a felon's jail. Because I tried to give voice to the truth, I was condemned to silence. You may say this is not a public question, but it is. So that's what the text says at the bottom. And this was sort of printed and put out and one. It's the one poster that ended up in a frame in my house, and so that's there. It's I think 1980s, in 1981 or 1982. Yeah. I'll be able to manage it. You're sure? Yeah, please do. I'll get very nervous if I'm doing it wrong. So we do the next one. The previous one. Okay, now this is actually a classic kind of poster, because we are, now what text you use, what paper you use, when you're doing mass-produced thing, it will be very thin, scrappy paper, which will fall to pieces almost immediately. And this is one of those, it also tells you the way in which communal riots became something that was a public question in the 80s and 90s. So you have, say for instance, this is made on very thin paper. It was mass produced in thousands and then stuck on different walls because it was part of the campaign. And you can see what they're trying to do. There is some attempt at the visual attraction because you have that big bright red sun. You have these figures that have been made. There is this account of the communal riots. Actually, this is 1990. So it is the beginning of the Shila Pujan and that yatra that they have started off. And there was a chain of riots across the area. Wherever the Shila Pujan went, it was, and one of them was investigated by us in Bhagalpur. But there were many other of these. Now, here again, you will see the text is very important because you have to capture the sentiment of what you're saying. You can't, and it has to be economical. So this one is quite interesting. Again, I will try and read it out to you. You see, okay. It's a famous one by Bridgman, which says, "Khub the law of dating the next elections will yield good results." the kings, the Rats will translate into electoral votes. That's what it is saying. And you have this list of the states in which the issues have come. There's a map of India, and I think this is very interesting. You know that the map of India is imagined to be right with forces in particular ways. It is the Akhand Bharat, which can be sort of broken in any way. You use this to mark the body of the nation with the blood spots, with the places where it's right. So it's not, instead of putting temples in different places, you've actually put blood spots in different places, and showing you the body of the Indian, the body of India as pock-marked by these blood spots. So it's a very, as I said, I think it's quite an interesting creative act in which you juxtapose image, text, and a map, all in very interesting ways. Next one. I think this is the text of that same one. It doesn't matter, we may not have time. Similarly, then the riots, then there were in Gujarat, there were riots against the Christians. The Christians got targeted in the Dangs. And so this is a series of things, and you can see again how it's translated. There are the crosses that have been thrown, and in its place, the crosses have been erased, and in its place, the trishuls have been put in place. And then you have a similar map of India with Gujarat fixed over there, and a way in which you're bringing to light what the meaning of these communal riots are. Okay? Yeah. Okay, next one. This is, here you can read the text. नेता ने सत्ता के खातिर कौमवाद से काम लिया, धर्म के ठेकेदार से मिलकर लोगों को नाकाम किया, लोग बटे टुकड़े टुकड़े में, नेता का मान बढ़ा, वोट मिले और नेता जीता, शोषण का आधार मिला, वक्त नहीं बीता है अब भी, वक्त की कीमत जान लो, मंदिर मस्जिद गिरजाघर को, we all used to sing it. मत बांटो, नहीं, मत बांटो इंसान को. So, wait. मंदिर मस्जिद, मंदिर मस्जिद गिरजाघर ने बांट लिया भगवान को, मत बांटो इंसान को. So that famous song which we actually created at that time and we took around in all these campaigns, that's the one that forms the text of this image. Okay, next. This is the detail of that, the lower part of the detail. Again, it tells you, you have to give information. The poster cannot just be nice looking. It has to actually give you all that information. So there is all this text that is put onto it, and that's also important. The last thing over says, number of attacks on Christians, number of attacks, then whatever. Outcome, 103 out of 123 attacks in BJP and whatever, and the criminals remain at large. It's a complaint we will constantly make, that the criminals remain at large. It's something that will come up repeatedly. Yeah. Yeah.
In that context, can I say something?
Do you want to say it just now, or do you want to say it? No. Okay. Sure.
I read somewhere recently, taking the cue from her, she's got a strong voice, she doesn't need a mic.
I've got the mic, it's a hidden mic. Anyway,
Okay, what I read somewhere recently was God made man. Yeah? God made man. Man made religion. Religion made many gods, and the gods are fighting with themselves.
Yeah, good, thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice comment. Okay, now this is another one of those kinds of posters. These are all campaigns that one was personally involved with. So we had a thing when when the first nuclear bomb was burst, and we felt very proud of ourselves and our great strength. Later on, we actually managed to get, we didn't invite him, but he was coming. Noam Chomsky came to Delhi, and we held a big meeting in a public space like a Delhi School ke compound mein, ped ke niche, we actually had this meeting. So here's this image which has been made, militarism, democracy, and people's right to information. It is it's one of the early posters made on the Right to Information Act, which actually led to the transformation of, that act being passed. So this is one of those things, again, made in thousands that we stuck all over the place. There's the dove representing peace, and there is this war-mongering person who's really only a skeleton. Yeah. This is just, you can move. And banners end up in my house as sunshades and so on. Move it. Coalition for Peace and Democracy. This also you move. I don't have time for it. These are posters from South Africa, from the Johannesburg Museum, the race, anti-race, whatever. They have a museum in South Africa. Move it. Okay, now I'm going to come to a series of these. He said, man-made, God made man, man made religion, religion made divisions, and whatever it is. How those divisions play out. Now the next set of posters are going to be on posters that the women's movement brought out. There is a relationship between the democratic rights movement, the left and democratic rights movement, and the women's movement. In the late 70s and early 80s, the women's movement actually is drawing from a larger pool of it's post-emergency, all of this is post-emergency, first comes into existence, and in the early 80s, women are articulating the need for being acknowledged as having a particular kind of violence and a particular kind of repression or oppression that they face. And it can't be left to women cannot be folded within the idea of people. You can't say man and say man includes woman, because actually man doesn't include women. There are very great differences in the. And one of the ways, and you know that the Constitution has also done, one of the ways is that you have actually, the communities are divided by religion, and then they are allowed to keep their personal laws, and the personal laws are a way of each one. Actually, every personal law represses women in a particular way. It may be different in one and different in another. So this is a very famous one, which actually is quite popular even in the rest of South Asia. It's not only in India that we have this poster. So you have these, the various religious laws, and then you have things like the secular law, family laws, penal laws, and the law of evidence, which is also all being carried by the back of this woman, okay? So, yeah, next one. And it's the same kind of thing. I can't read Urdu, but वो है, इसी तरह की चीज़ है वो. But basically, it's the same kind. Huh? We can. Now, this is a very famous poster. Some of you have heard of Chandralekha, the dancer. She was also an artist, and she made this image. It has led to a lot of controversy. And some of you know that Kali for Women, the first feminist publishing house, was called Kali for Women. That led to a controversy because it was stated as, this is exclusive, you're drawing the idea of female power from Hindu mythology, and everyone is not comfortable with it. But this one is interesting because there's this notion that the disempowered woman, on the left, you see the image is divided into two parts. The left side is unarmed, and it's in darkness, and the right side is armed. And it's meant to be empowering. But it, as I said, it led to quite a controversy. And I'll tell you how, but it was very interesting in the sense of the many hands of the goddess being used to do much more feminist things. This many arms of the goddess is very important because I remember in my own childhood and as we were growing up, if we demanded many things of our mothers, of my mother, she would say, I'm only a human being. I don't have many hands like the goddess has. So don't expect me to be able to deliver every single thing. It's actually a refrain that women use to say, don't ask us to do everything because we can't cope. I mean, we don't really have more than two hands. but move it. Now, this is very interesting because this actually takes the same image of the multi-armed goddess, but it came out of a women's workshop, a grassroots women's workshop. So you use the same image of many hands. But what you're doing is to create a series of things. All the hands got different things that it says. So I don't know if you can read, it says Pana, something else, whatever, a series of things. And then you have this lower portion which is Bata Jana. Bata Jana is the task for women. You see, reproduction is what they've learned to do. And then you have this slogan at the bottom, there's very big arm career. You will see that in ads or in materials, there's one who's like waiting at the door for her husband to come because she's going to burst out and tell all the terrible thing that she's experienced that day or the troubles that she's experienced. And the man will come in and she said, मुझे क्या ना मैं बताऊँ मैंने बहुत काम किया है the general days कि मैंने काम किया तो मैं बैठी थी what are you doing? You आराम से बैठी मेरी बीवी काम नहीं करती है. This is a regular thing. Even now you ask a woman what do you do, she'll say I don't do anything because don't know how to value her work. How is not regarded as work. Emotional sustenance of man not regarded as work. Emotional sustenance of children is not regarded as work. It's the whole of domestic labor disappears under the thing of it's not work. And Gadalana has written a brilliant essay which is called Just a Housewife. It's a brilliant account of the way in which women are seen to be invisible. Their labor is visibilized in the home. So it's a poster then picks off on that goddess image and tells you all the terrible things that and all things that women do. Picture guests trope that women actually don't do anything. Okay. This is the kind of thing that one has done. This poster was already there. So when you now do we are also reusing history a lot. Everybody reuses, including architecture and so on, but always reusing, looking on back of something else that exists. So we used this poster to actually talk about the movement as performance. We were doing a seminar on it. So you use the same image, but you put a lot of text around it to tell you. So you sold the two things together. You sold the original image and you sold the new information on it. Yeah. Okay, now there's a series that you're going to, this is Chipko. This is an attempt at showing you Chipko. Women as preservers of the resources and women as doing tasks of social reproduction also because you can see the mother and child over there, the sick child, and so this is one of those posters. Yeah. Again, very important issues that started to come up. Sexuality was a major issue in the women's movement. It wasn't actually given its due for many years. Ultimately, the sexuality movement has taken off. We know we've also had terrible setbacks recently, but the fact is that the sexuality movement has finally managed to bring itself into the public sphere in precisely the ways that other issues have been brought, and just to simply, say heterosexuality is as normal as homosexuality, and just to turn it around. That is, you think the heterosexuals are the normal ones, but yeah. This is a lovely one. I love this. Now, one of the things that we don't know is that the women's movement has actually played a very vanguard role in preventing the drug industry from using women's bodies to experiment on. You know that is whatever is a failed venture in birth control technology in the West is immediately sent to India in large numbers because of course what are we doing except breeding? So stop the population from exploding over here. So so there's this discussion about quinacrine and people really don't know this work, the work of the women's movement. Even today, this morning, we were having this discussion. I don't know if students know that the women's movement has had a very big hand in resisting Norplant, resisting expensive diseases, resisting cancer medicines because it is, the cartels are taking over. So to say quinacrine, so the guy is saying quinacrine is safe and she says, yeah, if it's not used, it's safe if it's not used, yeah. Now, this is the poster I really love. It's just, this is not something that women are entitled to. बैठ करके पैर उठाओ, किताब देखो और television देखो and you're sitting आराम से, and that notion that you should be entitled to relaxation time, masti time, is not something. So I just love this poster because of its bindas sort of पैर भी ऊपर खड़ा है and she's doing all the things that she wants to do, and it's got a sense of fun about it. Yeah.
Now this poster brings us to new global eras and whatever it is. I think Bangalore was the place, no, where there was supposed to be the Miss World contest. Big thing, everybody getting excited, right, left, everyone joining hands and saying we shouldn't have the, what's it called, Miss India, Miss World happening over here. ABCL is involved, that is Amitabh Bachchan Corporation Limited. No? That was the, Amitabh Bachchan is in the doldrums, he's lost all his money. He thinks he can revive his money by by backing this, this thing. And so there was a big campaign to stop Miss World from happening because of it'll destroy Indian culture, it'll, it's the early moment of globalization. So it's not so normal as today. Now, of course, there's this explosion of explosion. So even in your ads, you don't get Indian women being shown. You often have a, fair woman with blonde hair and so on. She stands for, there is a wider woman image that has been created. But I love it because of the fact that it's Miss Poverty. What is the next one? Miss Poverty, Miss Poverty, Miss Hunger, Miss something else. And the last one is missing girl child. That's really the issue. And it says, could not participate because she was not born. She could not participate in this contest because she was never even born. So that's the one, the missing girl child. So I love this poster. This is the text of this poster is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But it's December 16th, replayed all over. It's like, अंधेरे में अकेले बाहर मत निकलो. इससे मर्दों को शय मिलता है. Can somebody else who's very good at Hindi come and read this? नहीं? Any volunteers? Anyway, it builds up it builds up its don't go out, don't stay at home, whatever. And finally it says, can you? Acha, very clever. That's how you should be. हाँ. इससे मर्दों को शय मिलता है. किसी भी वक्त अकेले मत निकलो. हर सूरत में कुछ मर्दों को शय मिलता है. घर के अंदर मत रहो. रिश्तेदार और मेहमान दोनों ही बलात्कार कर सकते हैं. बगैर कपड़ों के मत रहो. इससे मर्दों का शय मिलता है. कपड़े मत पहनो. हर तरह के कपड़ों से कुछ मर्दों को शय मिलता है. बचपन से बचो. कुछ बलात्कारी बच्चियों पसंद करते हैं. बुढ़ापे से बचो. कुछ बलात्कारी बुजुर्ग औरतों पर भी वार करते हैं. पिता, दादा, मामा, चाचा, जीजा, भाई मत रखो. ये भी रिश्तेदार हैं और अक्सर घर के जवान औरतों से बलात्कार कर सकते हैं. पड़ोसी से मत रखो. ये अक्सर बलात्कार करते हैं. शादी मत करो. शादी में बलात्कार जायज़ है. मगर अगर पूरी हिफाजत चाहते हो बेहतर है जिंदा मत रहो. It's a sort of, that's the safest place. It's a rather grim account. Okay, now I'm going to go to a series of posters which is from my collection as someone. See, I've had a career I've had an existence as a teacher of women's studies to a South Asian institute, which was regularly run in Pakistan. For about 10 years, I went across to teach history there. I teach women's studies and history. And there it is very interesting. This is a beautiful painting made by Salima Hashmi. I don't know if you people know Salima Hashmi, but Salima Hashmi is the daughter of Faiz. And she's an artist and she teaches art over there. Now the divide between high art, that is the artist's art, and poster art has been kind of neutralized there by the women's movement, by people who have actually
given their paintings or made paintings inspired by some event. So Zainab Noor, it's called patriarchy in any form, name and form is whatever, so absolutely out of the question. It's called A Poem for Zainab Noor. It evokes this violence that she was subjected to, and there is a text below which one can't see, and it's made on very fragile paper. So a lot of her painting is on paper with watercolors, because the fragility of women's lives is expressed through the fragility of the medium in which she works on her paintings. And but this was used to again multiply and send out in thousands, because there was a campaign for Zainab Noor. She had to get justice, she needed a huge national campaign, because she'd been subjected to violence by her husband, gross violence. So this is one of those posters. Okay, next one. This is the detail from that. You can see that her mouth has been sort of closed. Okay, next. Now this is actually very interesting, because this is again mixed media. They've used a photograph imposed, a piece of art imposed upon a photograph. It's a famous event when streets of one of the towns was burnt because there was this agitation against the Danish cartoonist's writing of work that he did on the, and there was a lot of controversy. It's a very lovely one, because I feel that the sense of hope is retained through that girl who's just skipping in the middle of all this terrible onslaught of the violence and the right-wingers and the Taliban, which is actually preventing women from doing many things. There's an unabashed sense of life, which this little girl represents. So you can see what Malala's story, as we now know it, internationally. There are hundreds of Malalas who are actually resisting, and we don't know about that resistance because we like to tell the story in black and white terms, and we like to say Pakistan mein sari auratein that is repressed hain, hamare yahan to sab apne aap automatically liberated hain. This is from Bangladesh. And I think it's also interesting. There's March 8th, of course, is, March 8th, international history is evoked. So you have a series of women who have been assembled. And I like it because you're actually not being narrowly nationalist when you're positioning the women's question. Because one of the institutions that exists across the board, across the country, across the world, is patriarchy. So patriarchy may differ in the West from South Asia, but patriarchy is very much there. And you have a series of these women in which they have actually tried to include the pre-partition women in the history of the foremothers, as it were. So there's the very assemblage of so many women is very interesting. So you can see Sarojini Naidu is there. You can see, apart from, it goes into the 19th century America, and a whole series of women are including. I think there's a close-up of this. The next one has a close-up. You can see. So you can see some of their names, and it is very interesting that they're evoking this. Preeti Lata Vadedar. She's being referred to. I don't know if Kalpana Joshi is there, but they would have put her down. And it was interesting. Their first women's history lecture that they instituted, it was called the Preeti Lata Vadedar lecture, and I was invited to come and deliver it in Dhaka. So there is a way in which they want to keep the South Asian roots going. At least women's movement has tried to ride above narrow national considerations. Next one. Yeah, this is real detail. You can see that one is Sarla Devi Chaudrani. The first one is Sarla Devi Chaudrani, who is Tagore's niece and who was quite active. And then it's Sarojini Naidu, there's Annie Besant above, there's Clara Zetkin, and there's Rokeya Sakhawat. Rokeya Sakhawat is regarded as the foremost icon in but they've put her along with everybody else, which I like very much. Yeah. Okay, more details. These are the figures. Yeah. This is it. Ruqayya Sakhawat, educationists in particular, are all quite invested in Ruqayya because she did a lot of work for women's education. She was taught by her brother, and then she ran a school. By the way, that school still exists in Calcutta. The Ruqayya Sakhawat Hussain Memorial School still exists in Calcutta. So she's quite an icon in Bengal, but she's also an icon for the work, pioneering that work that she did for women's girls' school education. Yeah, next. This is just a fun one, you know. They've done this rather nice one. Again, they're being subversive because they're showing women playing sports, dressed in, football and cricket and so on are great passions, but we will not consider that women could be doing that. So they've done that. But then the lower portion is also showing you all the other kinds of work that women do. Okay, next. That's the detail from below. Now, we are back to India. I finished the South Asia part. This is actually from Kashmir. I don't know how many of you know this, but today there is a debate around the disappeared persons. I think the Ishrat Jahan case has actually made visible the encounter killings and brought encounter killings back onto the public forum. It is in Kashmir, hundreds of boys have disappeared, and it is the parents or the family members of these disappeared persons who have created what is called the Association of Parents of Disappeared Persons. It is, the chairperson of this is a woman called Parveena Ahangar, whose son was picked up in 1991, and she still doesn't know what happened to him. Nobody will give her an explanation of what happened to him, even though he was officially picked up from the house. She knows the army officers that were involved. She has moved every court from the local court all the way, not to the Supreme Court, but up to the High Court. She has gone to every single jail in search of him. Nobody will answer and give her an answer of where the boy is. And she's been told repeatedly, take the compensation that we'll give you. You get 1 lakh for the dead. And she's been asked to take the 1 lakh compensation and close the matter. And she says, what will I do with the 1 lakh? I want my son, or I want his body. Basically, she's saying, I demand state accountability. You took him from my house. You give me an explanation of what happened to him. I have a right to know what happened to him. So the state is being held accountable and is being asked to explain what happened to him, because it should be its duty. The state is meant to be the protector, but instead it is not even giving you the answer. So this is one of there have been many campaigns around the Association for the Protection of Democratic Rights. They ask questions which are very difficult to answer. Things like, did the sky eat them up? Did the earth swallow them? What happened to these boys? Just tell us what happened to these boys. That's all we want, really. Next. So this is some of the text that goes, the detail. Next one. Okay, this one you would all perhaps be more familiar with, because Iram Sharmila is now more news, but the answer that she's asking is still not gone. She's also basically saying, lift the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. It's simple. Under it, you cannot prosecute those who are guilty of crimes. So lift the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. It's the longest, we are used to talking about militancy, about violence and so on. But this is the longest non-violent. I think the Association of Parents for Disappeared Persons is the longest non-violent struggle, because those women normally demonstrate once a month in Srinagar on the streets. We don't pay any attention, and even perhaps Kashmir doesn't pay any attention. In Iram Sharmila's case, 10 years. This was at the 10th year. It's now 13. This November, it will be 14 years. She's being force-fed. She's being kept alive. She's being held in a hospital in custody, and you can't meet her. So she's equivalent to being a woman in jail, although she's not actually in jail. She's being supposedly held in a hospital ward. When we went to see her, we went when it was 10 years. We tried to go and see her. We were trying to campaign for the lifting of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. We actually even got an order from the court that said we can see her, and yet the transmission that was to happen from the court to the prison, to the DIG, to the hospital was never made, and we never managed to meet her. So she's being held incommunicado, and that I think is an issue that we should really think about. Okay. So these are a series of they're preventive detention, black laws. Black laws have been something that democratic rights groups have constantly talked about. This is one of them. Let's move quickly. We often do poetry recitations and sort of cultural events around democratic rights. So the posters that are made for them. And so this is the famous poster which we put on. Mandela was jailed by racists, Suu Kyi by dictators, and Binayak Sen by the world's largest democracy. So that will actually tell us where we stand as far as democratic rights is concerned. We'll stop. I think there are a couple more, but we'll leave it. So that's where we are. There's been a campaign for Soni Sori after this, but I didn't get a poster of that. Thank you very much. I don't know what format.
Of history.
Yeah.
Poster campaign. But you've been talking only about the ill treatment that women have been getting.
In the beginning and in the end, it was not women.
Oh. Between a large chunk of it was atrocities against women. Are women really, if we look at our past, our grandmothers had all the power. Socially, they were accepted. Mythology also had held up women's power. Over here, there are a lot of men. Do men really downplay the women? Maybe men at large, as perceived by the system, men are bad. They are portrayed bad, and women are portrayed very good.
I think we should move the truth. I'll just say one thing. It's not men are bad. It's not the individual man who is bad or aberrant. Patriarchy as an institution is bad, just as caste as an institution is bad. Class as an institution is exploitative. So I would actually say that.
I buy that totally.
Then that's
as an institution, it may be bad, but men are not bad people. They are good people. Everybody, if any woman is sitting over here, it is because of the encouragement that she's received from men.
No.
I would like to say,
No.
Have you, as a person who's studying on the diet, have you not received support from your loved ones?
I have had to fight for it. It was not given to me. It was not automatically given to me. You fight for it. There are decent men, there are democratic men, there are humane men.
Society, yes.
Yeah, but the point is that there are institutions that take away that power. You have to fight for it. No, you don't get anything by yourself. Let's be clear about that.
I think there's one question at the back. Yeah.
I'm from Punjab, and women are not encouraged to, work. These days, of course, but like my mother was never encouraged to, go out and work. So these days it's changing, but still I feel if you go to rural Punjab, it's still the same.
Yeah. And actually, I think in rural Punjab and rural India, what is extraordinary is that women work on the fields, and they do an incredible amount, apart from the housework that they do at home, and the cattle, looking after the cattle is also a job that many women actually do, they also work on the fields in certain castes and communities in certain regions, very widely. You know that in the South, you can't do transplantation without women. So women work in every field. The point is that it has been unacknowledged that they work. It's been regarded as, you women are here, this is their space, and essentially the upper caste modes of living have functioned as the tropes on which women must model themselves. And ultimately you may work, but who has control over the income is an important question. And I think essentially the women's movement has opened up these issues. I'm not saying that the situation is the same across the country or across generations. We know that older women get power, and they join up in the repression of younger women. We know all that. But the fact is that as an institution, women are less equal than men, and that's all that is being said. The reason why there are so many of those posters is because I was also
at alternative histories by way of the kind of writing that women do, life stories or whatever, autobiographies or letters and things like that. And even, for instance, cookbooks and ballads or things like that. But this is a modern day, mode, and more importantly, an organized kind of a movement, documents, which are very, very important. And it was fascinating to hear your account of it, and the kind of history that it represents is very fascinating. Thank you.
No, actually, there is no denying that women have been a critical. Nobody's going to say that women were not a component in society or that they did not contribute to society. But the regard for that work was something that was not visible till some of these questions hit the public domain. And what is wonderful is that there is now an explosion of the ways in which you can bring women's histories into the public sphere without having to go to the public canon, the official canon. Because if you go to the official canon, you will get only a few women over there. If you turn around and use the politics trope, then you will turn around and say women were not in history because they did so little. But that's not the trope. That's not the medium through which you should look at what women did or not, because in that you will simply say, in our country we had Rani Lakshmi Bai, or you had this. But the fact of the matter is that Rani Lakshmi Bai also was basically fighting to preserve the throne for her son. So what does the everyday woman do? The everyday experiences of women is what we would like to retrieve. And I want to say this, it's not only women, it's the history of the margins. It's the history of the laboring poor, it's the history of the Adivasi, it's the history of whole sections of Indian population who are not represented in the history as we conventionally taught it. That history is the biography of great men as a trope has dominated the thinking about history. Fortunately, that's changing. Subalterns, there was subaltern history, there was labor history and so on. I think the field is expanding, and the only good thing that women's history has done is to actually expand that field, because we know that even the subaltern movement did not include a history of women. It is only women who had to write their own, quote unquote, their own history. So in some ways, but now things have changed quite dramatically, and gender is trendy.
One thing about that I want to say, I read recently Marilyn Monroe, who was supposed to be a sex symbol.
Yeah.
Okay. She said, before she died, she said, I don't know whether I'll be happy. I don't know whether I'll be happy, but I'm gay.
Yeah. Chalo.
I'm gay.
That's good. She found her way to survive. Women have always survived. That's also important.
One more thing. I think, sorry.
Ma'am, I have a comment and also a question.
Yeah.
You say about this alternative history and also this archiving of it. When I look back, my parents' wedding invitation was also a piece of history, and their, the photographs of their parents, and one of my grandparents, did a family tree of it.
Yeah.
From that, I got to know 3 to 4 generations before who I know my lineage of it. But after he went, that became a burden. That all his artifacts, all things became burden. To be frank, all his progeny wanted only the valuable things, not these documents. Like you said, it is good to collect all these things of archives and everything, but what to do with that?
The point is, it is not a resource only for your family. It's a resource for anyone who's writing on history, no? So one of the things that people are doing now is to put all their archive on the digital, onto the digital, what is the word called? The cyber, and there are many archives that have come up on that. You can actually tell quite an interesting story. See, there's a certain value that you may have and you may exhaust it. But then, as you say, it's a burden. And you must always see that in families, the burden, the legacy is always divided. Basically, the interest is in the material possessions. Who is going to be interested very much in the paper? And we know how the paper ends up in the raddi. It will be just thrown. Somebody's huge amount of labor and whatever they did, the raddi is the place where it goes. But for some people, it will be valuable. And I believe that the small archive is what, the movement for the small archive is what we have to push. Because what we have, see, we are not a culture that necessarily preserves. We think that the oral method is the way we will tell this. But actually, what exists as remnants of an existence is something that we should retain. I made a film on a woman who left an archive only of paper. There was nothing else in it. There was no jewels, there was no nothing. There was only paper in it. And it made quite an interesting film because it was about the reading habits of this woman. What she was reading, what she was buying, and therefore what she might be thinking at a given point of time. I think these ways of using the archive, first preserving in small archives, we don't want it to. I'll tell you in the case of this woman, she had many papers. Finally, through some pushing, some of her papers went into the Nehru Memorial Museum because there were people who were around. Only 3 pieces of paper ended up there. One was a receipt for 65 rupees that she sent for the salt agitation. One was so that was one. Then there was a reference to the diary herself, that the actual diary that she wrote, because there were references to going to meetings on the Marina Beach and so on. That ended up, and a small photograph of hers ended up. But all her books and all her notes and all that she wrote, including the lists of books that she had preserved, large correspondence with the librarian, because she's trying to access the library even though she doesn't have a formal degree, and technically the Madras University library is not open to her. All this is something that they were not interested. So the Nehru Memorial Museum will not be interested in that layer but the small archive should be. The archive for education should be interested in what this woman is reading, and and how she's relating it to her life. So I think there are many things that we can do around archiving which would be useful and which won't be a burden to the individual family.
It's because the old the suitcase and everything, it became like a burden because it is out of fashion. It's not trend anymore. You can't use that. Second thing is what maintenance. It's because you have termites and everything. Nobody would be passionate as you taking from one house to another house. So I mean, we are losing part of history with artifacts also. That's what I'm saying.
No, I think you're right. But suppose we were to have a campaign for the small archive, wouldn't some of this material end up there? And it could be publicly preserved then. We have to think of the community in different ways. We have to think of the historian, practitioner of history in a different way, and take away from our emphasis on the public institution. Yeah, that's it.
I hope your cutting land up in the archive. What we saw was good. That we have to clap for.
Yeah, I'm not a historian, so I think about artifacts like this and perhaps in a different way. I was just wondering, if I were to try to interpret these, for me the most exciting thing are the struggles which these represent. How can you prepare some way of storing that along with these posters?
It's not difficult. All I need to do is, somebody's even they've done some camera work today, no? They've put it already. All we need to do is to do a voice thing that accompanies the viewing of it. Then it's available to everybody. Then its technology has made that possible. Then I don't have to come. Then somebody else can tell the way I tell that. And it is a personal archive. So in a sense, it has meaning for me, but it has also meaning for my time. So we can do it, and I think we must do it. Yeah. That's the way to take it forward.
Yeah, because the fascinating part in this is the people who were involved at particular times, the kind of marginalization they themselves might have faced, the kind of struggle they did. That is that provides such a rich story around that.
Yeah. But you know, one interesting thing that has happened recently is something called the Snowball Archive. So what you do is you prepare, say something like this, and I put an audio along with it, okay? And I put it online. Then people see it over there, and then they start sending in their own memories of how they were involved in campaign A or campaign B or whatever it is, and then it adds to that material. So finally it becomes a wider corpus than simply that one single person's account. And I think that's also a way in which we can keep it going, because everybody actually has a memory. And you're right, that is, there might be a controversy, there might be a thing, but there might also be some take on it which obviously is not something that I'm familiar with at that point, but it is, you can make it democratically accessible and let others get into it, including, say, you know, we didn't think that this was a campaign worth going to or whatever. I didn't tell you the story of that one, you know, the Ramanathan one was a very interesting one. There was this text that was, what was it? You may think that this is not a public question, but it is. Now, everybody knows, maybe not everybody, but some of you would know Kanabiran, the civil rights activist. Now, somebody called him up and wanted to know who that statement is attributed to. It's not Ramanathan's statement. They've used a text to speak about Ramanathan's experience. But who actually wrote that piece? And then that guy got a 1.5, this is in the days of the trunk call, when you didn't have the mobiles and whatever it is, it's the days of the trunk call. You are doing a trunk call from Delhi to Hyderabad, and then Kanabiran in his classic style does not keep, he doesn't, he lets this young guy have it. And he gives him a whole account of, he sort of lambasts him for the fact that this new generation is completely uneducated and unlettered. They don't even know what their history is, they don't read their texts, they don't read literature, they don't read politics, they do nothing. And then he said, it was Marx.
Oh my God.
It's a Marx, that's something from out of Marx. So this is, now, I tell this story sometimes and I don't tell the story sometimes. But if I have to put it online, I will tell the story, so that at least it will be complete, okay?
I think we'll need to close now. But thank you so very much, Uma, for coming to APU and for sharing this material with us. I know you said you've done this talk a couple of times before, but I don't think you've done it very widely. So we're very privileged to have seen these posters and heard you speak about them with so much animation, so much passion, and with such interesting critical eye and so much detail. Thank you so very much. And thank you all for coming. And we hope that you will visit us again very soon. Thank you.